Apologize before I continue. I know that what I am about to tell you may seem strange or even immoral. But don't get me wrong. I'm just a woman who sought solace in solitude. In my 62 years, having gone through a divorce, I thought I had dealt with loneliness. My home had become my sanctuary, my world where I could hide from the outside chaos. And so, when I decided to take in my nephew Jameson, I felt like I was empowering him and maybe myself too. We're both adults, we have our own needs, but no one could have prepared me for what followed. It was innocent at first. Jameson, then 26, full of vitality and ambition, filled a void in my home. His laughter, his endless conversations about life and the future gave me a sense of youth that I had long since lost. I was happy to give him this little piece of space in exchange for his company. However, despite my kindness, he became more and more brash with each passing day. I couldn't help but notice as cheerful voices, laughter and, to my great dismay, moans began to be heard coming from the house. I was furious. How could he be so careless about inviting girls into my life, into this sanctuary I had naively assumed was our temporary refuge? At first I tried to ignore the sounds that blocked out my thoughts, but each time it became more difficult. I got up in the middle of the night, shaking with shame and betrayal. Every laugh behind the wall was a reminder of my own loneliness. I couldn't understand what was going on inside of me. Yes, I had warm feelings for Jameson, but jealousy was like a black cloud over my soul. It was completely unacceptable. My nephew, the one who was actually a guest in my home, became a source of unbearable tension. At times like this, when thumps and moans sounded behind the wall, my mind tossed between anger and lingering longing. I could feel my blood boiling. I had the urge to go in and stop it, but at the same time something inside me clenched with a tender feeling. I only listened quietly to the sounds, realizing that this was happening in my home. With each passing day, I watched Jameson change. His confidence grew and the boundaries of what was allowed blurred. He became even more reckless, partying with different girls like it was his norm. At times I wanted to betray his silence, a construct I'd chosen to shield myself from the situation. But every time I looked at him, his bright eyes, filled with life and passion, awakened something in me that I had long tried to forget. One of those evenings when I heard laughter and pleasant voices again, I couldn't resist. I got up from my seat and headed toward his room. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought it was about to jump out of my chest. I hesitated, but I knocked nonetheless. Everything froze for a moment, and then the door opened and I saw him, Jameson, standing there, in the company of an incredible girl with bright hair and enthusiastic eyes. It was like a lightning strike. Everything inside of me gelled. "Hi, Aunt Layla," he said with indifference, and his girlfriend laughed as if it was the most normal situation for all of us. I felt my throat constrict. I could not speak, could not reproach him for allowing himself such revelations in my space. "Have you come to us for something?" he asked, and there wasn't a shadow of awkwardness in his voice. I snapped back to myself, the anger inside me feeling like it had produced an explosion. It wasn't just jealousy and anger. I realized that I had feelings for Jameson that I had been hiding for a long time. I began to think with a passion hidden in the darkness, and it was terrible. That night, confronted with this terrible combination of feelings, I decided to talk to him. I had to convey to him that this was simply unacceptable. Again hesitating, I walked to his door, now with determination. As if sensing my vibration, he opened the door. I looked into his eyes, full of playfulness, and for a moment I was lost in their depth. I finally gathered my thoughts and spoke. "This has to end." There was a certainty in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. What started as a quiet conflict became the marker for something deeper between us. The feeling of entanglement and attraction made us vulnerable to each other. A storm of emotions raged inside me: love, anger, passion, non-acceptance, and it all weaved together into something dangerous and forbidden. We were faced with a choice that could destroy everything. And then, as if by a sign from above, he stepped closer to me, his warm hands finding mine. In that moment, I realized I couldn't run away from this. I wanted him, as vulnerable as I was. We had to face something we both hadn't realized until that moment. This house, which was once a simple space, became an arena for the play of passions and emotions that turned us into two sparkling, wanting to be free of preconceptions, searching for understanding. Each evening spent together was an immersion into the unknown, into a world where rules and restrictions sprawled out, leaving a lack of clothes, both metaphorical and literal. It was a time of discovery, when our souls drew so close that the veiled impulses of our hearts began to dance in unison. In this story full of endless twists and turns, I realized that sometimes you have to take risks to open the doors of love. Passion in such a confusing world can be a ray of light that leads to an understanding of self and the other person. Jameson wasn't just my nephew, he became a part of my new beginning, even if it was forbidden. And perhaps that was our true freedom. I didn't know how long it would go on, and there was some foreboding in his every word that made me shiver. His tender promises, which had sounded so sincere in the days when he was mine alone, now seemed empty in light of the new truth. Jameson, my nephew, and my love, had promised to be there for me, but now his heart was given to another. All the strength that once filled me was now vulnerable and fragile as glass. When he talked about her, his new girlfriend, my heart fluttered with a pain that was impossible to ignore. I remember him excitedly describing her. She was so young, so full of life and energy. Taken in an embrace with someone else, it was so unbearable. I tried to touch him, to embrace him, but now those moments were accomplished with pain, leaving only bitterness. Life outside the window continued to flow quietly. People came and went, but all I had left was this empty house, filled every night with the sounds of loneliness. I smiled shyly as he fancied himself up before he went out, but emotions raged inside me that I couldn't contain, growing stronger and stronger each time. He'd come home and we'd be together again, but I could feel the barrier growing between us, impossible to overcome in any way. In those moments when he returned with joy, I felt like a ghost in my own home, a ghost of the desire he lacked. I was something that should have remained in the shadows, a mystery that made his heart beat faster, but yet, as bitter as it was to admit, merely a secondary love story. His every touch was now a fire that burned me, and every moment we spent together became a test. Our passion, once filled with sparks, was now turned into a secret weapon that could burn me. When he came home one day more anxious than usual, I was wary. "She doesn't realize how much I love you," he said, and I shook my head, trying to hold back tears. All those words he'd spoken, love, want, need, they all sounded like bells ringing now, foreshadowing my loss. I knew I had to be strong, and all my friends told me, "Layla, you deserve better." But how could I shut out the love that was open, tender and yet devastating? I was burned by this painful grief, even when he would sometimes just snuggle up to me on the couch to watch a movie. In that moment, I felt closer to him than ever, but when he looked at the screen, I saw something else in his eyes, dreams that had nothing to do with me. I learned to live with this sadness, hiding my jealousy even though I dreamed of him, longed for our passion. Hateful thoughts sometimes came to me. If I could do something to distract him, to show him that we have something she doesn't. I thought of every possible scenario to get him back, but realized that the real struggle was happening inside of me. Thoughts of despair intertwined with the desire to have him again, causing me to have feelings for a man I simultaneously loved and hated. Eventually, that night came. He came intense, with a tortured look on his face, and I knew right away that he was in trouble. We sat in the kitchen and he talked about her disagreement with something, how she wanted more time, more attention. Every word hurt me like a knife, but in a strange way I felt this outpouring of his feelings bringing us back together. These moments of silence, filled with his experiences, seemed to help us reconnect in ways that seemed to have broken. I moved closer, pressed myself against him, and the movement was more than just physical. I could feel his heart beating against mine as he hushed me, as he wrapped his arms around me. That moment lasted forever. We were lost in each other, and in that moment it felt like everything I had dreamed of was making sense again. The misunderstandings, the pain, all of that faded into the background. But the instant his lips touched mine, I remembered her, the other woman who stood between us. I pulled away, listening to the inner voice that begged me to stop. I needed to find myself, to set boundaries before this became a dangerous game again. Jameson, I started, but he'd already dismissed my passion, looking for more than an explanation. We spent the rest of the evening in agitated silence, realizing that each new step could be a mistake that would shake our reality. And yet, this inner conflict, struggling between love and duty, seemed to rekindle in me the passion that had been hidden. Now I knew what I had to do, what my next play was in this complicated family. Yes, I could fall back into the sweet embrace, but I also realized it was time to set the rules. Even if it meant telling Jameson that I didn't need secrets in our relationship now. We could no longer stay in the shadows, sacrificing our dreams for love while creating our reality. I had to free myself from that burden to find my way to true happiness, and this time I was going back to my own desire to be me. Tomorrow I would tell him that our affair could no longer remain a secret. Let him decide what was more important to him, living with open cards or staying within the boundaries set by fate. But I will not be a victim any longer. The time to act is now, the time to justify my desires.